Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's TMS. Today we will be watching together a pre-recording webinar on the improving of your scientific writing, which is an important skill for all the research, and in particular for the youngest. As always, if someone has a question, could write in chat, and at the end of the session, we will talk together about this answer. And of course, the most expert will answer us. So enjoy the webinar and see you later.
Hopefully, I'm sure a few of you have heard of, have come across my work. And Waleed invited me to talk about improving your scientific writing rather than statistics, which is fine with me. I do a lot of writing. I'm a professor at BYU in Utah, and I do a lot of writing. In fact, I've published 142 papers in the past 8 years in 29 journals and in 14 different disciplines. So I've published a lot. That actually works out, I did the math, works out to about 1 publication every 3 weeks, which turns out is a lot. Yeah.
Sorry about that. We have some problem, and I will solve it in a few minutes.
Okay. So hopefully, well, I'm sure a few of you have heard of, have come across my work. And Waleed invited me to talk about improving your scientific writing rather than statistics, which is fine with me. I do a lot of writing. I'm a professor at BYU in Utah, and I do a lot of writing. In fact, I've published 142 papers in the past 8 years in 29 journals and in 14 different disciplines. So I've published a lot. That actually works out, I did the math, works out to about 1 publication every 3 weeks, which turns out is a lot. Yeah. But this also means that I've probably doubled that number of submissions and rejections, probably in the 200s for rejections. I got 2 rejections this week. So that's great. I'm going to turn those around and submit them elsewhere. But to publish that much, you need to submit that much, or quite a bit more than that much, actually, because you'll get some rejections. I definitely get more rejections than acceptances, which is a good experience. It's a learning experience. I'm a senior editor at JAIS, one of the top journals in my field, and I'm on their editorial board, their ERB editorial review board. I'm an associate editor at Frontiers in Psychology and at AIS-THCI, another journal in my field. My field, by the way, is information systems. I do a lot in psychology and marketing and others, but my field is information systems with a focus on human-computer interaction. I am a track chair at our top conference at the Paperathon. A Paperathon is like a hackathon, but where you build papers together. And so you have a group of people coming together who have never met, and some come with data, some come with skills, and some come with just desire. And you write a paper together in 24 hours. And you pitch it to a bunch of editors, like Shark Tank, and they sort of bid on it and decide who gets to submit the paper to which journal. It's pretty cool. But it's taught me a lot of how to put together a paper quickly, and what makes a good paper. I'm always reviewing. I always have a few reviews on my plate, probably a few dozen a year. Let's see. I'm associate editor at all our major conferences, and I'm a doctoral advisor for dozens of students. So I've done a lot in terms of writing. I have some experience. I'm getting a lot of echo from somebody. If it'd be okay, unless you're talking, if you could mute your mics, that would be great. Hopefully that'll work. Okay. Yeah, I'm not getting the echo anymore. Excellent. So all this experience is to show I've done a lot of stuff relative to academic writing, scientific writing. So you got me, despite me not usually working on a Saturday. I'd like to know about you a bit. This won't take long. There is a Zoom poll. Let's see, and I can somehow share it. Here it is. Launch polling. I just sent everybody a poll. I don't know how that works, but I know that there are polls. Maybe it showed up on your screen. And I'd like you to answer that poll if you can. Does anyone see it? Did it show up?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Good.
Chiara, you are muted again. Please, whoever is muting Chiara, do not mute Chiara.
Can anyone hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Yes, it's clear, but I think
good.
you are talking.
Funky. Okay.
I think now it's okay. Good.
Oh, good. Okay, looks like we have 42 responses on this poll. I'll just wait for a few more here. Just give representation. So it looks like we have, surprising to me, mostly undergrad and master's students. That's very surprising to me. I guess outside of the US, undergrad and masters do a lot of research. In the United States, not so much. Doctoral students, that doesn't surprise me, about a quarter of us. Doctoral candidate, 19%, good. Assistant professors, associate, we have a full professor here? Ooh, I'm not even a full professor. Not yet, hopefully in the next few years. Other, what's the other? Maybe a professional. Or not a student, maybe. Let's see, scientific pubs, a lot have none, 1 to 5, 5 to 10. A few of you have more than 120. Yeah, way to go. Good stuff. Let's see, what roles do you currently have? We have some editors, a lot of reviewers, other editorial roles. Not sure what that is, but I just put it there. We have an editor-in-chief here. Wow, cool, 2 of them. Let's see, getting a lot of feedback from Wadi. Research, business, social sciences, not business, hard sciences. Oh, cool. I always wanted to publish in the hard sciences. Don't know what I do though. And then research approach, experimental, archival, survey, and qualitative. Good stuff. Hopefully what I say today really doesn't depend on your field or your research approach. What I'm talking about is just writing. So hopefully it'll just be relevant to everybody. I'm going to close this poll now. End polling. So thanks for letting me get to know you. That helps me target my comments a little bit more. The thing I'm going to talk about most. Someone. There we go. The thing I'm going to talk about most is essentially coming up with good research problems and validating them early so that you don't make the mistake of doing a lot of research in the wrong path, in a path that's just going to lead to rejection. There's a paper about this called Avoiding Type 3 Errors. We know type 1, you got false positives, type 2, false negatives. Type 3 is false science, having bad research questions. That's something we want to avoid at all costs. And so there's a paper about this by Arun Rai. It's published in MIS Quarterly, one of the top business journals. It's in the Fortune, FT50, whatever that stands for. It's in the top business journals. There's a link there. It's free to download as far as I know. And it talks about coming up with good research questions and not coming up with questions that will be rejected. And it's specific to information systems, my field, but the principles are generalizable to everyone's field. So one thing I've done as a doctoral advisor and also as I'm the chair of the pre-PhD master's program at BYU in the business school. It's where we prepare graduate students to go do a PhD. One thing I get asked a lot is how to develop a good problem to pursue. And so I put on the stat wiki how to start every research project by listing or by filling out these 6 questions. And if you can fill out these 6 questions, essentially just in a bullet abstract, then you'll have a pretty good idea of what your problem is and whether it's worth pursuing. So I'm going to talk about each of these in turn. Again, these slides are available. I put it in the chat window at the very, very top. You'll find it. It's also just on the stat wiki at this link right here. If you go to this link, you'll see the slides already posted there. So the first question you need to ask when you're writing a paper or when you have a project idea is, what is the problem you're seeking to address? You have to have a problem. One fallacy we make in academia is we think something's interesting and therefore it's worth pursuing. But it's hard to publish something that's just interesting. So if there's no problem, usually it's hard to get backing for the research if you're in a funded field. It's also hard to get editorial interest if there's no problem. Why do the research if there's no problem? Another fallacy, especially younger scholars tend to make, is they'll state that the problem is that we don't understand this area enough, or it hasn't been researched enough. That is not a problem. That is a gap. That is a gap in research. And often gaps are there for a reason, because there isn't any good reason to publish or to research those gaps. That's not always the case, but a gap cannot be the only problem. There must be a problem in addition to a gap in research. Don't fall into that trap. So there's got to be both. Very often, as an editor, I'll get a paper and they will never state a problem. It will just be, we don't understand enough. There hasn't been enough research done in this area. I always send those papers back before sending them out to reviewers and say, you need to find a problem. Otherwise, what's the motivation for doing this research? Also, another common problem when writing, first off, we have trouble defining our problem, but we'll start writing anyway. And what happens is we end up having multiple problems we're trying to tackle at once because we're experts in this area, right? Otherwise, why are we writing the research? Or we're becoming experts, at least. And one thing we'll do is we'll have all these problems in the field. We've read all these papers and we've done all this research and we can see all the problems in the field and we try to tackle them all at once. And we can't do that. It ends up bloating your paper. You have really long papers that are hard to follow, and it's hard to know what the study that has been designed is addressing and what the findings actually imply when there are multiple problems. So my strong recommendation is when you're writing up the problem, make sure it's just one problem. This works to your advantage as well. If you're able to publish on this one problem, then you're also able to follow that up with the other problems, and you can publish multiple papers. You can both publish multiple papers on a single data set even. You might collect data on all these problems, but then just publish one paper at a time off of that data set. I have a data set from, it's not even my data set. My advisor, when I went through my PhD, Kalle Lutman, he collected data back in 2001. And he's probably published, I don't know, 10 papers in top journals just on this one data set. But he didn't try to tackle them all in one paper, and that worked to his advantage. So that's find a problem. Make sure that problem is defined. Also, when you're coming up with a problem, you need to justify why that problem is important. It can't just be interesting. Again, it has to be an important problem, and it has to be a contemporary problem. I received a paper as an editor, it was probably a year ago, and it was an amazing paper. It was written so well. The methods were phenomenal, just pristine, very rigorous. It was like 2 to 3 years of observations and interviews and additional quantitative data. It was very impressive. But the problem they were addressing wasn't contemporary. That problem had been addressed 30 years ago and resolved, essentially. There had been a lot of research in that area, and everything that they were trying to resolve had been resolved already. And so despite the beautiful research they had done, it didn't need to be done. And so it got rejected. It was really sad. They had spent years on this, but there was nothing new. And so it's got to be contemporary. It's got to be a current problem. Let's see, we talked about that point. What makes something important? This is fairly subjective. So I tried to quantify it a little bit. Important problems protect resources. That's one thing they do. They protect money, they protect people, any resource of your company or your organization, or it contributes to resources. So again, you can You can create money, more profit. You can create happier employees, more satisfied customers. It contributes to those resources. It can improve human experience. That's another way to contribute to resources. It could enable new opportunities in science or practice. So sometimes the problem we're trying to address isn't immediately practical, right? And that's the way science works quite often, is we aren't studying things always that are immediately implementable in practice. Often the things we're studying are the building blocks to something that will eventually be implementable in practice. And so if it enables new opportunities, even if that is just for new research, then that might be important if down the road we can see that there will be an important contribution. Or enabling new thinking. Quite often we don't know what problems need to be addressed because we haven't thought in a certain way before, or we haven't framed our mind or framed problems in the right way. And science is often good at coming up with theories that help us think differently to enable the generation of new problems that need to be addressed. So that could be important, enabling new thinking. Often old problems don't need to be readdressed. I mentioned that. There is value in replication research, but not so much in the social sciences. Well, there might not be rewards. There might be value, but there might not be rewards in the social sciences. When you replicate research in social sciences, it tends to get rejected because what's new, right? In the hard sciences, this is less the case. It's important to replicate, especially in medicine and in physics. But in the social sciences, replications usually don't get attention and they usually get rejected, sadly. So once you've found a problem and you've justified that this is an important problem, you need to figure out who else has addressed that problem. Because usually the answer isn't nobody. Usually somebody has addressed this problem in the past. You are not the first one to think of this, probably. There are rare occasions when you have this spark of enlightenment and you're the first to ever come up with this problem. But again, rarely is that the case. So go find out who's researched this before. And it might not be exactly your question. If you're studying, I think I might have a bullet point on this. If you're studying something very, very specific, in fact, I just did a study with a colleague in Nigeria who's working in Malaysia. He was studying creativity in higher education in Malaysia. I mean, this is a very, very specific problem. Has anyone ever studied that before? Maybe. Has anyone studied something like it? Yes, quite a few. And so you need to abstract just slightly outside of your own context and then find those who have studied that. And then once you find that research, you need to figure out what they missed. I think that's the next slide, actually. So here's another example. I study virtual reality quite a bit and augmented reality. This exact question I don't think has been studied in a Malaysian context, but there are theories that could inform that research. And there are people who have studied that dependent variable. What is my dependent variable here? Adoption, technology adoption. That has been studied extensively. So I need to find out what people have said on that topic. And then when I do, answer the next question, which is, well, in what ways were their researches and their studies incomplete? Because if they've covered your question, what do you study that's new? Now, often you'll come up with a problem, you'll refine it, you'll justify it, you'll motivate it, and you'll find the research and you'll find that people have studied the exact problem or something very similar to what you're interested in. At that point, you don't give up. You try to figure out what they missed or what they could have done that they didn't do or what they just didn't have capacity to do. Find now the gaps. You've already found the problem. Now find the gaps in that research. And that's where you can focus your efforts if those gaps are important. So that's those points. We talked about replication. One gap I often see stated in submitted papers is that extant research is conflicting. There are inconsistencies in findings. And that's like the weakest of justification for gaps. There are going to be inconsistencies because of different contexts, because of different other variables included in the model. Muted. There we go. Okay. So saying that you're doing this research because there are inconsistencies in findings of extant research, probably not good enough. You need to find another. I'm going to mute you again. There you go. Unless you're trying to say something. If you're trying to, Islam Ali Al-Hedadi, if you were trying to say something important, go ahead and text it in our chat window. Because it was coming through all muddy, so I've muted you. Okay. Oop. Okay, I think we're good. Okay. Let's see. Yes, public service announcement here. One thing I'll find in submitted papers is the authors will, when they're pointing out gaps, they'll often be a little too critical of extant researchers because they're trying to justify their own research. So they say, oh, you know, this group or this author, they totally missed this or neglected this, or they can't talk about this. You know, their research was essentially garbage, is what it comes off like. You can't do that, because usually when an editor is trying to find reviewers for your paper, they will look to see who you cite, especially the people you say have missing or limited research. If you're basing your research off of that study, saying there's a gap in that study, they will have that author of that study be your reviewer. So you better be nice. Otherwise, that reviewer is going to be a little upset and make you walk your language back a little bit. All right. I'm just watching the chat. Sorry, I'm a little distracted. Okay. So those are the main things. These four things right here, these last four slides. If you can do that, these first four, you're in really good shape. And this is something I recommend you do for every problem you want to pursue, every research project you think you want to do. First, do these first four things. They will take you maybe an afternoon. They will take you maybe an afternoon, but they will save you weeks of research going down the wrong path. So please do these four first. Once you've figured out these four, and maybe shared it with a senior colleague or someone you trust who you feel is smarter than you are. I do that with my research all the time. I send it to my buddy who's way smarter than I am with this stuff. And he usually says, oh yeah, that's stupid. Or, you know, here's why you shouldn't do this. Or here's a better way to do this. Or that's a great idea. But have you thought of this? Or have you seen this paper? And they'll usually expand my mind. Because even in your own lit review, you're going to miss stuff. But do these first four. And once you have sort of validated this idea, then you can move on to the fifth and sixth, which are important details. Let me scroll down to that. Here we go. So how are you going to go about filling those gaps in the research? This is all about study design. You've probably heard the saying, to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. To the researcher who knows SEM, every problem can be solved with SEM, right? Or to the researcher who's really good with surveys, every problem can be studied with surveys. Same applies for qualitative methods. And this is why you need to collaborate with other people. Get people who know different methods than you do and who have access to different populations, and you'll be able to do much better research. You'll also usually find that the way you initially conceived of studying this problem maybe isn't the best way, and maybe requires multiple stages of study. One maybe that is qualitative, observations, interviews, something more exploratory than you had previously thought, and then maybe something more confirmatory, where once you have the findings from this exploratory research, you can then go and do a more generalizable quantitative approach. And then this is sometimes the downfall, right here, number 6. even if you have a really important problem and it's valid and there's a gap in the research and you know how you're going to study it, can you get the data? I advise executive doctoral students quite often, and they have great ambitions. They want to study surgeons. They want to study CEOs. They want to study former presidents and Senate members and heads of state. And it's just not feasible. How do you study these people? They don't have time for your research. And if you're going to do something quantitative, you're not going to have enough sample size to do any real statistics. So make sure you can actually access the data you need. You might have to pare back your ambitions to collect data from a more accessible population. Lastly, and this is the end of my slides right here, if you want to prevent desk rejects, which are a total waste of time, although they are better than getting it through a few rounds and then getting rejected. But if you want to avoid the first desk reject, here's what I recommend. Get early feedback. So answer those 4 to 6 questions just in bullet points in 1 to 2 pages, and send that 1 to 2 pages to a colleague. And make sure you say in your email, this is bullet points, 1 to 2 pages. It'll take you 5 minutes to read, and get that feedback immediately. And since it's in bullet point, it's going to be easy for them to digest, easy for them to understand, and to ask you the right questions in return to help expand your thinking. Sometimes we're shy about our research. I remember when I first started as a professor, I thought, yes, I'm free. I can do my own research. I don't have to be under the thumb of my advisors, and I can do my own ideas, which are so much better than my advisor's ideas. And so I wrote a paper. I spent months writing this paper, just crafting it to perfection. It was poetry on paper, and at least in my mind. And I submitted it, and it got desk rejected, just right off the bat. And had I just taken the few hours it would have taken to refine the idea and send it to my advisor, he could have told me right away, oh, this is a waste of time. Don't waste months on this. And I could have. It would have been great, but I've learned since then. I say send it to a trusted colleague. There might be a temptation to send it to me. I pray you will not. I get so many emails every day from people I don't know, from around the world, asking for advice and feedback on their dissertations and papers. And I give as much as I can, but I have my own research I have to do. And so I limit myself to some extent. I answer about a couple dozen every day. And then I have to cut it off after about an hour. So if you are seeking advice on anything, please do just send something very concise. Again, don't send me your whole methods and findings and analysis section of your dissertation and say, hey, what are your thoughts? I would appreciate it if you don't do that. You have great advisors, leverage them. I advise my own set of about 24 doctoral students. Work with smart people, again, not me. Occasionally I'll have people invite me to their own research, and I appreciate that. I usually say no. Occasionally I say yes. I have a few co-authors right now who I said yes to because they had access to data that I couldn't get, and it was in an area that I was fascinated with. And they had already done a lot of the legwork. So if that is the case, yeah, feel free to send me an email, and I'll be pretty straightforward with you. Hope you'll forgive me. But do collaborate. I wish I had, before this meeting, counted the unique co-authors I worked with. If I had to take a guess, I would have close to 100 unique co-authors, which is insane. With 142 pubs, that is a lot of different co-authors, and it's been a great benefit. They see things differently than I do. They see things differently than my doctoral advisor does, and they see things differently than my colleagues at my university. And so it's great to work with a lot of different people. And often you'll get stuck with one set of collaborators, and you won't get moving, and you'll have some issues in the productivity process. So work with a lot of different people, have a lot of different projects on your plate, That's another thing. If you want to be a productive writer, it is unfortunately, to some extent, a numbers game. Oh, there you go. I just muted you. There we go again. Sorry, somebody's coming through pretty loud. It's coming from Islam. There we go. That fixed it, maybe. Okay. As I mentioned earlier, even though I have a lot of publications, I've had a lot of rejections and a lot of submissions, at least double the number of submissions. If I'm publishing once every 3 weeks, I'm submitting a couple times every 3 weeks, which may sound impossible, but it's not if you collaborate with a lot of people. So right now, I probably have 20 active research projects going on, maybe more. But I still only work 30 hours a week. You just prioritize and you focus. You delegate the things you don't need to do, don't do. Have a research assistant do it, or have a colleague who maybe is less senior than you do it. If you are the junior colleague, just you might have a lot of work to do. And then you can look forward to being a senior co-author. And here's something that might be a little. This is a piece of advice I didn't take seriously as a junior scholar. Now that I'm a little bit more seasoned, I realize that editors-in-chief and senior editors don't mind if you send them a snippet and get their feedback. Before I ever submit to a journal, I always submit to the editor-in-chief or a senior editor at that journal first. I don't send them my whole paper. I send them a bullet point abstract, essentially. Essentially, those 6 questions is what I send them. And I get their feedback and say, hey, is this an appropriate fit for your journal? Or is this something that your journal would be interested in? And usually, 60-ish% of the time, they say, no, I'm not interested in this. This is not something I'd be interested in, but you could take it to this journal, and they would probably be interested. So that saves me months of submission and waiting for review. And if it does get through a lazy editor who doesn't look at it and just sends it out to reviewers, that's another few months. And then it gets rejected. So that's terrible. Just get that feedback within a week, and then you haven't wasted your time. You might be afraid to do this, and that's totally cool. That's why you collaborate with more senior scholars. Have the most senior or most influential or well-known scholar on your team send that email. And those editors-in-chief, those senior editors will usually respond, especially if they make it short email. It's easy to digest. And those are all my slides. This is just my shameless plug for my educator course. I created an online structural equation modeling course. If you haven't seen it, there's the link. It goes through the whole SEM process. So anyway, I'm up for questions. Post this video on YouTube.
Okay, so thank you for your attention. Now we are here for the question. If someone have questions or comments, of course the most expert will answer to us. And of course you can write them on the chat, or if you prefer, you can raise your hands and unmute yourself and speaking. So since I cannot see question in the chat, maybe I can start with a question for the expertise, if someone would answer me. So I was thinking that sometimes our hypothesis could be confirmed by by our experiments, but sometimes this hypothesis could fail. So in this case, in your opinion, could be mindful publish or maybe try to publish the data, our data, or it's best to forget all the works done?
Maybe you can try to say something. Can you hear me?
Yes, Marco.
Yeah, so in general, taking data and putting them in a drawer is never a good idea, because even if your hypothesis was not correct, if you've done the experiment correctly, then you have data that are reliable, and so it's something that is always worth publishing. Of course, there are cases in which, you know, and this is something you learn by working, there are cases in which you need to conceive your research in a way that you can publish whatever result you get. Because sometimes if you structure your project in a way that if it goes well, you have data, and if it doesn't go well, you don't have anything, then you know you made a mistake before. But in general, whatever you have, you should publish. You should always publish. Also, if you have some data, you know, if you have a lot of data that are for your hypothesis and you have some data that are against your hypothesis, you should also publish those data in some way as a supplementary figure, and you should comment that although most of the experiments go this way, you know, we have some indication that this could be different. So this is my opinion anyway, and I think you know, if there are other more expert people than me, they can confirm.
Okay, thank you, Marco. There is someone who wants to reply, or there are other comments or questions? No, don't be shy, please. Okay, since there are no comments or questions, I think we can close this session. So thank you everyone for the attention, and we will see you to the next TMS. Goodbye.